excellent institutions such as the African Population and Health Research Center and its demographic surveillance site, as well as In-Depth. So there's a big investment, even supported the preparation of Manual 10. So there was a lot of investment in demographic training. And when I came to the Hewlett Foundation in 2011, it was a time when there was also kind of in parallel a lot of excitement about the use of non-traditional data sources, transactional data, data from social online social networks, and other kind of technology-enabled data sources. And a growing awareness, I think, of both the potential and the limitations of those novel data sources that were not actually, their main purpose in life was not, in fact, to be representative of large populations or to be collected with great fidelity to particular methods, but really that it was available from kind of ongoing digital sources that could feed into, that could be used to analyze patterns of human behavior and distribution of people. So there was this, on the one hand, there was very careful methodological development and application in the field of demography. On the other hand, there was a kind of wild west of big data, data science. In 2012, the Harvard Business Review labeled data science as the sexiest profession of the 21st century. So the excitement, that just sort of says how much excitement existed in around that time about the potential for data science. So the Hewlett Foundation, along with others, really talked to many of the grantee organizations in the demography and population studies portfolio and said, is there a way in which you can see the careful methods of demography really contributing to the smart growth of the big data and data science field? And so that's what you'll hear some about today. The point is not what the Hewlett Foundation did. The point is what the field of demography did and how the relationship between demographers and data scientists have gone over the years. So with that, I will first turn it over to Louise Shaxson and Emma Summon for a kind of overview presentation, and then we'll have a quick round with the panelists. And I just want to say in advance that because of a competing obligation, I will need to drop off at the top of the hour, but we'll hand it over to my able friends at IUSSP, who we can thank for arranging this, this session. So with that, let me turn it over to Louise, right?
Actually, I think I'm going to jump in first.
Oh, okay, sorry. I turn it over to Emma.
Thank you. So let me share my screen with you. Here we are. Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so basically I'm going to summarize a report that Louise and I have undertaken, which itself is focused on the work program that IUSSP undertook between 2014 and 2020. Which, as Ruth has said, was focused on demography and the data revolution. So the program itself was aimed to advance linkages between demographers and data scientists to strengthen demographer involvement in sustainable development goal monitoring, and to improve more generally the use of population data in policy. So Louise and I had both participated in the 2014 inception meeting for this work, and therefore we're especially pleased to be involved once again in this assessment. So the final report that IUSSP produced detailed a volume of activities that IUSSP has undertaken. These included 17 workshops and seminars, which together attracted over 800 participants. There were 3 expert group meetings. There were 5 training workshops and participation in diverse international initiatives. And among the highlights, I'll mention the 3 panels that IUSSP sponsored on digital demography, the strengthening of civil registration and vital statistics systems, the Population Environment Research Network, the 2019 expert group meeting on population data for the 21st century, the 2018 and 2019 Summer Institutes on Computational Science, which I think we'll hear more about later on. However, the detail of this activity to some extent left open the question of whether the work program had fulfilled the spirit of the grant. That is, to what extent these activities had advanced the overall project goals. And so to address this question, Louise and I conducted interviews with 22 people who were familiar with IUSSP activities. So these included IUSSP members, students, academics from different fields, and some civil society representatives. So firstly, in terms of whether we found that in many ways the work program itself had been successful in fulfilling the spirit of the grant. Our interviewees commented on the breadth and the depth of the union's activity, on the opportunities it offered for engagement in academically interesting and policy relevant debates, and the contribution that IUSSP had made in particular to advancing CRVS and to institutionalizing digital demography as a discipline. And at the same time, the conversations typically reflected a mix of things, of what the union had done well, some challenges that were perceived, and several recommendations for future work. So we grouped the issues that had emerged into 8 themes. And what I'd like to do is describe each of these extremely briefly. So the first theme concerns demography as a discipline. And particularly now, given that earlier concerns around the so-called population problem have receded, our interviews pointed to some lack of clarity over how demography may be evolving as a field, what it's offering, and how this differs from data science. And it was felt that IUSSP may be able to help redefine what demography can contribute to academic and policy debates. The second theme relates to the deep political and ethical questions that arise in the collection and use of data, including big data in particular, and also more broadly, the premise that better data leads to better lives. And this was another area that some interviewees felt IUSSP might address further. And one concern that emerged was that funding flows to data science may be creating unequal power dynamics, acting to marginalize institutions, researchers, and insights from the global South. The third theme concerns IUSSP's offer and reach. So our interviewees overwhelmingly had positive views of IUSSP activity, and they also felt that there may be ways that it could engage more effectively in political or policy-oriented processes. And for some interviewees, this could involve articulating more clearly its offering to data revolution activity and whether and how this should go beyond insisting on the correct use of data. And one question that emerged is how USSP can continue to sustain its work in promoting demographers' participation in data-related debates, given the current project-based funding climate. A fourth theme concerns communication, and many of our interviewees suggested that IUSSP might place greater emphasis on the communication of its research, and particularly to policymakers and other non-academic communities. The fifth theme was partnerships and networks. And there our interviews pointed to pivotal contributions that IUSSP has made in terms of building bridges between demographers and data scientists in particular. And again, highlighted that perhaps more work may be needed to engage further with institutions such as Paris 21, GPSDD, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN. The next theme we addressed is training, or that emerged in the interviews. And here, IUSSP has invested very heavily in the training of junior scholars through workshops, the summer training institutes, and initiatives such as the CRVS Fellowship Program. Recommendations here included further investments in the training of scholars from the Global South. The seventh theme that emerged is engagement with junior scholars. And here we interviewed 2 graduate student members, and their reflections showed that while they valued many aspects of their membership, they would particularly welcome more support in navigating the research and funding landscape. And finally, our 8th theme concerns specific issues that IUSSP could tackle next. There were many plentiful recommendations here. And so to mention just a few, these included debates around pandemic recovery, issues such as urbanization and climate refugees, and further attention to the sharing of data and code, again, amongst many others. So thank you. I'll end here, and we very much look forward to your reflections on these issues. But I'll now hand over to Ruth.
Thanks very much. Wow, that was just a little appetizer for what we will talk about now. So we have an amazing panel of people who have been participants and observers of this field and the relationship between demography and data science, or the data revolution, for years. First, Sam Clark from the University of Washington, I'd love to hear from you about how you think IUSSP training and outreach has been responsive or not to the needs of junior social scientists, junior scholars. I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Sure, thank you. I just want to say that I'm a professor at the Ohio State University, and my background is,
sorry.
No problem. There was some confusion about that. So my background is in demography, but what I really do is demography, epidemiology, and statistics. So I decided to be a little bit provocative and also quite specific in what I'm going to talk about here, and just run through some of the things that I think are important in terms of drawing younger academics into demography, into the future, and how to navigate this increasingly gray area between demography and data science and things like that. So my remarks are going to be informed by my history with these things, which is primarily in the academic world in the United States. I think we need to start with the question, what is demography? If we're interested in getting people into this field and also positioning it with respect to other fields, we need to know what it is that's special about demography that other people should take account of and be interested in. And my answer to that question is that demography is shaped by knowledge related to population structure and dynamics. So the population is a key element, structure of the population is a key element, dynamics are a key element. And then it's a set of specialized skills related to the acquisition and analysis of data describing populations. That's the working definition that I have in my mind, and that informs how I think about how demographers relate to other things, including the data revolution, data science. So the next question I think is important is, who does demography now? So we have traditional demographers, and in the American tradition, these are people who have the skills and special knowledge about demography, but also have substantive training in other fields, most commonly sociology, economics, political science, a variety of related fields, and very importantly, health fields, although the connection is not as formalized between demography and public health, global health, epidemiology. Now, in addition to those traditional demographers, we have data scientists, we have statisticians, and we have computer scientists. So all of these people are doing things that are recognizable as demography. And a short while ago, the data scientists, statisticians, and computer scientists played much less of a role than they do now. So the next question, because data are so central to everything, is where do the data come from? Because this is driving a lot of the issues around training, who gets into the field, who's doing things. So traditionally, those data came from censuses, surveys, and administrative sources. Now they increasingly come from additional sources. Administrative sources and administrative records are much more important and will definitely grow in importance in the future. Censuses and surveys are still there. Now we have important contributions from remote sensing and from so-called big data. So this includes digital exhaust, social media, happenstance byproducts of larger data collection and data manipulation exercises that were not designed for demography, and as Ruth mentioned, are not positioned in a way to be representative of a recognizable population that we're accustomed to. And then, in addition to all of this, we have innovative combinations of all of them. We have people who are working on combining these data sources and producing analyses and results that many of us would recognize as demographic. So that's a set of issues. Another question is, what is the future of demography in American academia? And here I'm speaking to my own experience, but which does, I think, have some features that generalize beyond the American academic situation. So it really depends on what we mean by demography. There's formal demography, there's quantitative sociology, there's health metrics, and there's data science. So formal demography is what many of us used to consider the core, but really the field of demography in the United States has turned into kind of a quantitative sociology that positions itself in a way close to economics in terms of being very rigorous, empirically driven, careful, close to the data, and attracts a lot of people who are interested in that general approach to examining social issues. Then we have health metrics, which is a whole nother thing aimed primarily at health and health-related outcomes, but there's a big gray area that bleeds into sociology and the other related fields. And then we have data science itself, which is computer scientists and statisticians who are primarily interested in methods and data in and of themselves. And they're interested in working on interesting things that involve cool data and interesting new analytical strategies. So depending on what you think is demographic, you're going to highlight one or more of these kind of general scopes of initiative. So I think that the future of demography is going to be driven by, first, what questions are important and urgent, and then by who is actually doing the work to address those questions, regardless of what field they come from or what set of skills they bring to the table. And that, who is doing it, is really going to be driven by the skills that are required to answer the questions. And finally, that set of skills is really going to be driven by what kind of data you're interested in using to address the questions. So I think in addition to the traditional definition of demography, we really have brought in a very important new set of dimensions that have to do with specific skills that are required to address these new data streams. And those have in turn opened up new questions that can be addressed using a demographic approach. So becoming a little bit more specific about the training issues in the American context, traditionally demography has kind of awkwardly been placed within the substantive disciplines, mainly sociology. So demographers are trained in sociology programs. They're given some additional training in terms of the formal demographic methods, a little bit about data, and that's kind of it. The real focus has been on the substantive field, and the data and methods part has been drawn in as an application-based training. What's missing is really the development of new methods, the innovative creation of new approaches. It's not completely missing, but it's been downweighted as time has gone by. And I would say in the American context, that is a very, very weak part of the training that's going on for new demographers. So what to do about that? The key specific problem, I think, is the fact that statistics and computer science, the two fields that are generating a lot of the new and young people going into data science, are not tightly coupled with the training programs in demography. And what turns out is that people from those two fields, statistics and computer science generally, are going on and essentially creating new methods that can take advantage of the new data sources and answering the new questions. And demographers in general, everywhere, are being cut out of this loop because those really are very specific skills, and people are just in demography are not being trained to have those skills. So my conclusion, I'll wrap it up now. If we think demography brings something useful to the world, we need a wholesale rethinking of demography training, not just in the South, everywhere. Because my sense is that if you look at the exciting things that are happening in health metrics, IHME, the kind of cousins of IHME, if you look at the MDG work, the SDG work that's going on now, you look at the remote sensing work, it's being done by people who were trained and primarily identified with other fields, not demography, even though they're producing indicators that we would all consider to be demographic. So I would say without this rethinking everywhere, demography as we know it will gradually disappear as a distinct and self-orienting set of activities. So that may be provocative, but I stand by it very firmly. And I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sam. And sorry for getting your institutional affiliation wrong. Thanks for correcting that data. And thanks also for kind of setting the table around what is demography, what is data science and big data, and also for provoking us to think about this as essentially an existential question for demography about how to rethink ourselves. So with that, and asking all of subsequent panelists to be as brief as possible, Claire Melamed, let me turn it over to you. You are the head of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and in that capacity have a view, I think, about how all of the sort of contributors to better data for social good can come together, and particularly maybe the national statistics offices. So would love to hear your comments on these issues briefly.
Thank you, Ruth. I will try to be as brief as I can. And thank you, Sam, for that really good introduction, which I've been frantically live tweeting away because I think there are things there that need to be captured. First of all, I think actually just to set the context, just first of all to congratulate IUSSP and the Hewlett Foundation for kind of launching this work. I think this kind of internal questioning, analysis, real sort of assessment of a discipline's place in the world is all too rare and is a really, really valuable and kind of useful thing to do internally, as well as obviously being valuable for the wider community to think about how they can engage with the field. And congrats to ODI for a good piece of work. I think as I was thinking about this, I mean, the last time I was involved in this conversation with some of the people who are on the panel was in the very early days of the Global Partnership, which is now 5 years old. And it was a good opportunity, I think, to reflect on how different that conversation and the world feels now compared to then. I think then we were in a world where, the sort of differences between disciplines, statistics, data science, demography, and so on were very stark. People were quite anxious about how they could relate to each other. There was, to be frank, a sort of fair amount of kind of mutual suspicion and anxiety over sort of whether one discipline was going to kind of take over and drive all the others out, and how they could collaborate, and was somebody going to get all the funding and everyone else was going to be left behind. And I mean my sense is that having been now sort of immersed in this world for quite some years, and particularly involved in actually kind of putting some of this stuff into practice at the country level, is that a lot of those early concerns have very much dissipated, thankfully. People are much better and easier now about understanding each other, the sort of value of actually people having kind of worked together over a number of years now and just sort of got down to specific problems, solving specific problems, working in countries, understanding how they can work together, has really kind of, obviously, there are always going to be issues about working across disciplines, but my feeling is that people are much more respectful of each other, appreciative of each other's contribution, and understand how the kind of working together can actually, that the whole can be more than the sum of the parts, and that working together can actually lead to better insights than any single discipline can achieve on its own. So it's not about competition, it's not a zero-sum game. And I think, that's very much sort of what the context, I think, in which we need to see this work and think about the future of the, you know, of sort of how demography can fit itself into this world. And Sam's been, I mean, I think, frankly, I think demography could do a better job of explaining itself. You know, I think that the points that Sam made at the beginning about, you know, what is the contribution of demography? And I think, you know, we're all here because we believe very firmly that there is one, and these are really critical questions to ask, and demography and demographers have very specific insights and methods, and are the sort of custodian of a very valuable academic and practical tradition in helping to answer these questions. But I think that case could be more strongly made, and I think it needs to be strongly made not necessarily partly through big picture conceptual kind of, you know, where do we sit in the world, but actually probably more compellingly through practical, you know, practical projects and work. You know, we're in the middle of a census round, which has now been sort of delayed in many countries because of COVID. But, you know, countries are grappling with these the exact questions that demographers need to answer right now. They're all, you know, there's a big census round going on. COVID has thrown these issues of health and inequalities in health outcomes and the link with demographic characteristics absolutely at the heart of policy making in every country. And I think really I'd sort of say, you know, is that, you know, it'd be great if one of the outcomes of this work could be demographers having increased self-confidence to get in there, but also a kind of somewhat less defensive stance and a more sort of openness to just getting in there and, you know, really kind of with the confidence of their own contribution and really understanding in practical terms, what does it mean to work together and answer some of these questions and sort of prove the value of demography by showing, not telling. Just, you know, get in there, actually be part of the answering some of these questions. And I think, as I say, these are the questions that we see every day from the governments that we work with. The questions at the front of their minds, especially now, are exactly the ones that demographers are at a sort of best place to answer. So I think really, if there was ever a moment for demographers to sort of prove their worth by getting in there and working at the kind of coalface and really just getting down and working with all of these other parts of the data system to sort of see in very practical terms what is the contribution that they can make with others to answering these questions. I think that's where we're at, and that is the moment. It's a great opportunity. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Claire. And that is the perfect segue to hear from Tom Moultrie. So Tom, from the University of Cape Town, it would be absolutely great if you could sort of continue this discussion and talk from your own perspective in South Africa and your own work, which I know is very active now in addressing the COVID response in the country. I think you're well positioned to comment on all of the questions that have been raised. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And certainly what I want to say follows on from what Claire and Sam have said. And I think it's important when we go back and reflect on the time of the last 5 years in the data revolution to remember where it came from. It came from the origination of the SDGs, where the UN had set itself the goal of no one being left behind. And one of the aims of the data revolution was to seek to give content to that. And the initial IEAG report 2015 set out 3 specific challenges. The first was to foster and promote innovation to fill data gaps. The second was leadership and coordination to enable the data revolution to play its role in sustainable development. And the third one, which is the one I really want to reflect on today, was about mobilizing resources to overcome inequalities between developed and developing countries and between data poor and data rich people. Now, demographers, I think, have been very useful in the first. I think it speaks to many of the activities of the IUSSP over the last few years, as outlined by Emma and Louise's report, as well as the involvement of demographers in projects such as Grid 3. In terms of the second, in terms of leadership, some demographers, but not necessarily the IESSP, have been able to insert themselves into relevant conversations around data for development, for example, through the GPSDB with Claire, the World Data Forum, and other entities. And these interventions, to my mind, have often been timely and important, especially through engagements on the limitations of both old and new data, the critical importance of not abandoning old data in favor of newer, bigger, cleaner, shinier data. Certainly, a couple of years ago, people were happily talking about abandoning the census, saying we can do everything by remote sensing. You know, we've moved on from that, and along the way, we've won important arguments. The centrality of time series of data, even if they are of poor quality, they allow us to understand the historical evolution of developmental trajectories, even where those data are not so good. And one's got to be careful about abandoning a time series of data. Also, the limitations of newer technologies, such as remote sensing. But it's at a global level that I'd argue that the most concerning and pressing failure has been in terms of that third role, that third goal about kind of trying to ensure that the gap is closed between developed and developing countries. And despite that overarching SDG ambition, whole regions of the world are at risk of being left behind. We see it in the work of the well-funded research labs based in the global north, which risks decapacitating local research and knowledge in the global south. Why should countries try to improve their CRVSs or run a census if many of the crucial metrics being used or being demanded by the international data community can simply be used or accessed from a global data set predicated off models? Do the skills exist in developing countries to call some of those results into question, to challenge our original?
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate, again, a more provocative comments and your perspective. Now let's hear from Vise Adjawanu from the University of Montreal. Did I get that right? It would be great to hear from you and your perspective, particularly on whether and how IUSSP has or could be better at serving the needs in the global south, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and maybe particularly Francophone countries. But would love to hear your comments on any of the points raised by others. Welcome.
Thank you, Ruth. And I'm from the University of Montreal, University of Quebec in Montreal, not University of Montreal. It's a second Francophone university in Montreal, but is a little bit different. So I'm associate professor there, and before that, I have been for 5 years a professor at the University of Cape Town, working with Tom Woodtree, and I'm very happy to see him here this morning. I'm going to follow from what Sam Clark has said in his introduction about the need in terms of training for demographer, a new training for demographer to take fully advantage of the arm of data that become available to us today. And is in that perspective that I have run the summer school in Cape Town in 2018 and 2019. When I joined Cape Town, I graduated. There are 7 years that I graduate from my PhD. And so I talk about 2013. And during my old program, there are nothing about data science that we are talking about. Most of the training that we had have nothing to do with big data at the time. So you graduate, and I see the same thing today, even in Quebec here and in the global south, that the training is still like lacking behind the real change that happened today in the world about the data that become available and about the new methods that have been developed elsewhere. So the idea of the summer school was clearly to bring those methodology to demographer and to let them understand the better way that they can just do their research differently and maybe finding solution to the problem that have been always there, but in a different way. So those summer school, we were very fortunate to be in collaboration either with IUSSP, I was going to say about that most importantly, but also with two colleagues, Matthew Sarganit from Princeton University and Chris Bale from Duke University, who have started this summer school in Princeton in 2017. So is where they need to do something very relevant, very similar in Sub-Saharan Africa come to my mind. And I have started to organize the summer school in Cape Town in 2018, but the funding that we have at the time can just help us to do small things at the Cape Town area. And I have talked to the president of IUSSP, Tom Legrand, and to tell him about this opportunity to train new researcher from Sub-Saharan Africa about those new methodologies. And he was very enthusiastic about that. And is where we had the first funding from this summer school, where we bring many other junior researchers from Sub-Saharan Africa, from Francophone Africa, and also from Anglophone Africa to Cape Town. And we did that in 2018 and in 2019. Globally, I think we have reached more than 15 participants from 15 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa who came to Cape Town to really enjoy this training. And you can see that from the comment they have provided. And I think it's the first time that many demographers in Sub-Saharan Africa have engaged with this new methodology and this new big data area. But the way that you can see the success of the funding that you receive from IUSSP is not only for the training that we give during these 2 weeks, it's also about the impact that have in the life of the people. Actually, I think that we have almost 4 students who are taking their PhD either here in Montreal or in the University of Laval in Quebec or at Max Planck, who are doing research. I talk about junior scholars from Sub-Saharan Africa who are doing their PhD in the connection between demography and data science, okay? So that is very interesting. And those junior academics have attended the summer school that we have run in Cape Town. And also some of the alumni of this summer school are starting to developing their own summer school actually. Like one was run last year at University of Stellenbosch, who I'm very happy that they take over that summer school and spread it a little bit in Sub-Saharan Africa. And there are other initiatives that is becoming available. But one important thing that I want to stress here is that it's not in 2 weeks training or webinar that we can change really the field of demography in Sub-Saharan Africa. We need to really engage with the curricula that is developed. We need to train PhD students in those new fields and give them the possibility to engage really and fully with those new methodologies. So the way I see it is that IUSSP have given us some funding to develop those summer schools and spread it. The next level should be, from my understanding, it is what and where I'm working on actually, is to make sure that we collaborate with graduate school in Sub-Saharan Africa and develop those new training for those graduate students. That was my idea 5 years ago in Cape Town, and I'm in discussion with ISSP in Burkina Faso to see if we can integrate and put this new field, this new methodology in their doctoral program at ISSP in Burkina Faso. So I discussed with them, and it could be very interesting that IUSSP help us again, like they did it 2 years ago, help us again to keep in contact with those, if possible, with those doctoral programs in Sub-Saharan Africa and to engage in this discussion. But most importantly, I think that we talk about dividing the knowledge between the North and the South. We talk about the problem that the South have with training and so on. But one place that is very important that you have to focus on is in Francophone Africa, okay? I would really love to present my talk in French, but you can see that for the many people who are in this discussion today or who are in the attendees, they have to listen to all our going to talk in English, but many of them are French, are Francophone, okay? So we have And in Francophone Africa is where I think the most challenge are in terms of level of fertility, in terms of poverty, in terms of health issues, is where the problem are. And is where I think IUSSP can make a big change to go over those places and make some change. So the next level for me is, and I'm happy to come back to a Francophone university here so I can collaborate more broadly and more fully with those institutions in sub-Saharan Africa. But here is the place that we can make a strong change and a strong impact in the life of people. So I'm very happy and thankful for the support that we have received over the last 2 years to run those summer school and bring those scholars to Cape Town and thank you for accepting me to this panel and bring those perspectives to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think some of the most interesting training work has been happening over the years in Francophone countries, and you've been a key contributor to that. So thank you very much for that. And sorry, I got your institutional affiliation wrong. It seems to be a chronic problem with me. Sorry about that. Last but definitely not least on the panel is Emmanuel Le Tozei, who's the founder of the Data Pop Alliance and a pioneer in the field of, I would say, digital demography. So, Emmanuel, you have much to contribute to this conversation and would welcome your brief remarks.
Thank you very much. So I hope you can hear me fine, because although I'm in New York, the connection is not great. So yeah, hopefully I'm just testing. Okay. So so I'll try to be brief so that we can have a discussion. So thank you very much to IUSSP and ODI and all the panelists. I mean, it's been really a great discussion, and I don't say that just to say that, but I mean, I agree with so many things that were said. So I'm not going to list them, but yeah, it's been really nice to listen to the discussion and participate. So yeah, so just some quick remarks. I mean, so first of all, so I'm a demographer by training. So I did my PhD at UC Berkeley in one of the few standalone departments, at least in the US, in demography. So under Ron Lee in particular, and so I come more from the economic demography part of demography, and I also studied political science before, and I've been as you mentioned, Ruth, so the director of Data Pop Alliance. So all of this to say that my remarks are of course flavored by what I studied and what I do now. I have a bit more of a, let's say, activist mindset. I'm quite interested in political economic questions, and so perhaps what I'm my position is not shared, in particular that demography should be more forefront, should be more certain in policy discussions. For example, I mean, we know that demography is not seen as being super sexy. There are few students. All new students want to study data science. It's hard when you say demography, democracy. What is this? And so perhaps one thing we should think about, and just a proposal I've been saying for a couple of years, that I think it should be rebranded as population science or population science and policy. And actually, it's not very new. So Judith Blake, who started as an assistant professor at Berkeley, had then an appointment as a professor of population policy at UCLA. And so this rebranding actually could be something to be discussed, whether we should actually talk about population science and policy, because words matter, and I think it could be an interesting thing to think about. So more substantively, so just a couple of points. I agree that so demography, in terms of policy and politics, should be more engaged in seeing the data and the insights really matter. So in being more forceful in being part of policy and political debates. Judith Blake, whom I mentioned, had pretty tense exchanges about whether babies are consumer durables, etc. And demographers tend to be very humble people, which is great. But at the same time, sometimes I would like them or us to be a bit more ascertained and be more engaged in policy debates, especially with COVID, questions of differential mortalities and race, like race differentials with respect to COVID and many other mega trends. You can think of climate change and environment. We can think of like mass migrations. I mean, there's so much that demographers could talk to, and I think sometimes we sort of hold back a little bit. One thing that I think is especially interesting is actually what demography could bring to the study of the data revolution and to the fourth industrial revolution. So Ron Lee, so my PhD advisor, wrote this paper in the mid or late 90s about the dynamic synthesis of Malthus, Bothrup, about the role of technology and population change and development. And so we moved from hunter-gatherer to agriculture to industry. And now we're all asking, so what's going to happen next in the computer age? And so I think it's a great topic of an area of investigation. Second to last is I also think that there's something very interesting to study data as a population. And so there's a lot of questions about what is going to be the size of the world's population of data in 10 years, in 20 years. And so I tried doing that with Emilio Zaigeni, for example, a couple of years ago, and other demographers, trying to ask, applying demographic projections, methodologies, and tools to trying to understand what is going to be the population of data. And the structure from social media, etc. And so I think it's also an interesting area of investigation. And last, there is all those debates about digital IDs. And I think we deal with personal data. We deal with human data, with demographic data. But I think in the future, the questions of privacy, the questions of how we're going to deal with digital IDs and access to data, which Emma mentioned at the beginning, is also something that we should definitely get into, because there are lots of political ramifications there. And I know, Ruth, that you're well versed into these questions of digital IDs. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. What a provocative panel. Really, really appreciate all the deep thought. I think we have about 5 minutes before I need to jump off. Louise, can do you want to moderate this part, or should I just make a few brief remarks?
I'd be very happy to hear your remarks, Ruth. But I did have a specific question, which is that, as you said, when you set this webinar off, you've been involved in global data issues for most of your career. And I was wondering, does this discussion echo any of the previous debates that you've been involved in? And if so, what can we learn from those debates?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, to some extent, there is, of course, an echo of the past, particularly some maybe skepticism or concern about the kind of data revolution and big data taking over, but very much more an advance and a deeper discussion of what the opportunities are for the field of demography to advance. Let me just say very briefly that I think that, we've talked about data, we've talked about methods and methodological communities. And I think that, for me and my own work, what animates and motivates is really the problems that the world has and how our intellectual efforts around data and evidence and methods can be brought to bear on those problems. So, just to kind of highlight three that are very much top of mind at all times, one is kind of structural economic inequality, both between and within countries. A second is the seeming inability in many countries for public policy to be responsive to the needs of the most vulnerable. And the third is our sort of collective inability to anticipate and prepare for future threats. So in all of those spaces, I think that there is tremendous, tremendous need and opportunity for good data and evidence, and those who are responsible for generating and using that to be part of the solution to those very big, profound problems. And I think that demography in particular has something really profound to contribute in a number of dimensions. And I'll just list those. Many have been referred to before. And this would be in conversation, in collaboration with all the other fields of biomedical and social sciences. So those are a kind of fastidiousness around data quality, really, really crucial to make sure that the public policy is informed by the best possible data. Second is an obsession with representativeness. And I really think that this is so crucial as we go forward and think about leaving no one behind. Third is an ability to separate rates and structure, the simplest demographic concept around decomposing of dynamic phenomenon into rates and structure. This is, like a superpower of demography, because you can, with that fundamental insight, you can project into the future. And there is nothing more important for public policy than to be able to predict the future. And demographers they have the crystal ball of population projections. And finally, highlighting things that Tom and Bissay and others have said, I think that there's a growing, and I'm hoping strengthening population or kind of community of demographers and data scientists in the Global South who can create homegrown analyses and really be part of the solutions to problems in their own countries and regions. And I think IUSSP can and has done a great service in connecting disciplines and supporting work in the Global South in particular. And with that, I'm really sorry to have to jump to what promises to be not nearly as interesting an event and leave you to follow up. And some of the questions in the chat are really excellent. So I hope that you get to those. Thanks to everyone. And I will now try to leave gracefully. Bye.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Really appreciate it. And particularly since she was calling in from California. So the time difference was pretty heinous. So I'm going to take over. And what I would like to do is I would like to just have a little bit of a discussion between panel members first. But as I do that, I will be monitoring the Q&A and trying to drop some of those questions in as well. So please do. The Q&A has been it's been pretty active. But if you have got any other questions, and particularly questions in response to what Ruth just said, please do put them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to them. So we've heard about sort of the definition of demography, and we've heard about ideas for rebranding it, and we've heard sort of about Ruth's key issues. And I have a couple of questions, and I'm not quite sure who would like to take these first. But one of my questions is, what is the responsibility of other organizations? So IUSSP is a small organization, it's a small network, as Nico van Nijmegen has been saying in the chat, it encompasses not just demography but other disciplines as well. However, but the grant that set this particular strand of work off has ended. So there are certain things that a small organisation can do. But what is the responsibility of other organisations, whether those are funding organisations, members of the global partnership, whether those are national governments, academia? Particularly, we heard from Ziho about the challenges that most of this work is being done in English, and also the private sector. Let's not forget the private sector. So I wondered, would any of the panelists maybe like to offer some opinions on what is the responsibility of other organisations, and from that we can then infer, what can IUSSP, as this grant is wrapping up, what can it do in rebranding and reaching out to different groups of people? Would anybody like to take? I'm going to expand my screen so I can try and see everybody on that.
I can start that if
Claire,
it helps,
thank you.
Please.
Yeah, thanks, Claire.
My connection isn't that great, so let me turn my, hope this works. So I mean, I think those of us who are active in the sort of world of data and have any sort of commitment or interest to working across disciplinary boundaries have a commitment really to a set of shared values, some of which Ruth talked about just now. I think there's a sort of commitment to, well, not everyone shares this commitment, but for us it's about, a commitment to using data to sort of change the world in a positive direction. So a commitment to data which is useful, a commitment to certain aspects of data quality, absolutely, representativeness, the importance of no one behind and so on, I think is really critical. A commitment to openness, both of the data itself and the sort of transparency around the methods and the assumptions that lie behind that. A commitment to interoperability, to a commitment to the whole idea of having different data sources which speak to each other rather than just one, rather than sort of one that seeks to dominate. So I think there are various kind of normative things around what are the characteristics of a kind of good data system, which all partners need to have a commitment to work together on. But I think, within that, I'm not sure that any one discipline has a sort of commitment to any other over and above recognizing the value that it has in recognizing that it has a valuable contribution to make. I'm not sure that it's necessarily for sort of data scientists to have a commitment to statisticians or vice versa. I think they kind of all need to state their own case and demonstrate their own value. I think if a discipline can't be clear about its own contribution and the value that it brings to solving these common questions in a way that contributes to the overall system, I'm not sure that it's anyone else's job to do that for them. So I think we absolutely we all have a very strong commitment to, as I say, a sort of set of shared values about what makes a good system. But I do think it's really important that different parts of that system are sort of clear. I often, it's surprisingly hard to be clear about what your own contribution is in this wider ethos. And I think, all of us, and certainly this is true of us in the partnership, spend a lot of time thinking about actually what is it we're bringing to the table here, really? Why should anyone actually sort of want to spend the time working with us rather than someone else? And I think it's really helpful if everybody comes with a clear and confident sense of what they have to offer, and then it's much, much easier to negotiate and understand and be successful in actually operationalizing the partnerships, which are absolutely critical.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. I wonder, we have three representatives from academia on the panel, so that's Tom and Vitiho and Sam. I mean, it strikes me that it's actually quite important for sort of academic demography to really help to articulate this. Or is that a misperception on my part? That what Claire is saying is that the demography does now need to sort of reiterate what its role is in global debates around data. How do you think academic demography can contribute to that? Tom, was that you putting your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I mean, I think that clearly there is something for academic demography to do, and I think in the craziness of the last 10 months, what COVID has shown is what demographers, why they matter, in terms of kind of working on the epidemiology, understanding, kind of trying to avert some of the greater misinformation. And I think that academic demographers particularly have again been able to demonstrate the utility of a demographer's approach to understanding data, and particularly they're working with other disciplines, epidemiology, crucially. And so there is a particular role here, which I think the current crisis has actually given demographers a chance to show why their skills matter. But beyond that, I think we have to go back to what Sam said at the start. Where is academic training in this field going? Programs are struggling to recruit students, even graduate students, and that's not only in the global South. It's true of the UK as well. And where do we actually, is demography going to become a canon and a series of methods and understandings and concepts and methodologies which can be grabbed by anyone and used? Or is the field actually going to say we're still going to try and preserve a disciplinary framework? And say, what we bring is uniquely insightful, and so I think there the question is saying, is the training which you're doing, is it fit for purpose? Are we able to sustain small departments and numerous institutions, or do we have to actually think of that certainly what we train as demographers has to be done very differently from here on out? I think Sam was probably going to want to comment on that too.
Sam, sorry, I can't. Oh, yes, there you are. Yep. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I was going to say something similar, following on from Claire's comment. I think the reality here is that a demonstrated utility is the real value. And what's happening is that fields, disciplines, practitioners who can accomplish something useful to other people are being noticed and perceived as exciting, and things are following that kind of paradigm. It's essentially Darwinian. Like Tom said, we're having trouble recruiting students to this discipline. And I think that reflects the fact that there's more exciting things for them to do. And they're making choices based on what they see as the future for themselves and for the things they're interested in. So that makes me really wonder, like I did at the beginning, what is demography and what specifically do we bring to the table that augments these other things, or perhaps stands on its own, like Tom mentioned. And to be honest, I'm not dead sure that I have a good answer to that at this point in time. I see statisticians, I see computer scientists, I see epidemiologists and economists doing demography very, very well in the context of their own fields. And I see students being interested in those things and following that. But I also see something else, and that is back to what Iseo and Tom both mentioned as well. The way that funding has gone has prioritized some of these other approaches to doing demographic work. And we really do have a dramatic problem in terms of the way funding has concentrated in these, what Tom characterized as large labs in the North. We have a gigantic funding stream that's going to a very small number of people, really focused on a particular set of issues that overlap with demography. And I think that sucked the oxygen out of a lot of the rest of what we would all like to do. And so that affects the South disproportionately, but it also affects the North if you don't happen to be attached to one of these large labs or somehow in its orbit.
Thank you, Sam, for that rather depressing set of comments. You see, I wonder, there's a comment in the chat that that on the MOOC platforms like edX and Coursera, demography is sort of weakly represented compared to other social science disciplines. And given that you ran very successful summer courses in Cape Town where you brought together demography and social science, do you think there should be a much greater effort to engage globally online? Do you think there is still value in bringing people together? I mean, obviously, we need to consider what is going to happen post-COVID. But what are your thoughts on that, and whether that's a way to make a difference is to have a broader reach rather than just a deeper reach?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think that one thing that we have been successful to do with the summer school is also to make available the code that we have run. to make available all the teaching online to all people around the world. Okay, so that has been done, but if you go look on those tutorial, those courses that is online, is not branding as a demography, it's branding as mostly as data science. So what I try to do as a demographer during those summers is to make sure that we didn't forget the core of what it means to be demographer. The core is, for me, is about the quality of the data, and we are well positioned to talk about the quality of the data that we use as a demographer than any other academic that you can think about in social science. For many years, we have been in front of the quality of the data, and all the data that we use, we take care of the quality of those data to make sure that they are representative, to make sure that we deal with all the problems that they can have. But here is the point. When that comes to big data, we refrain ourselves because we say that the data are not representative. How can you, at the same time, try to respond to questions about the most vulnerable and representativeness? Most vulnerable are those who are not representative. So you have to reach them differently. And reach them differently means that you have to use those big data that is available there. So we have to reinforce and to make sure